everybody wants the Cliff's Notes from Robert's Rules, because who wants to read the entire manual, right? So welcome to our AM 101. It's going to be Robert's Rules of Order for board meetings, and it'll, like I said, it'll be the Cliff Notes version. Just remember to please keep yourself muted. You can ask questions in the chat, and we can talk to Brian throughout this so that we don't get too far behind on the questions, if that's okay. And then all of this will be recorded as well. So you will have the opportunity to rewatch it on our YouTube channel, and everybody who registered will get the link for that and the meeting materials. And with that, I would like to introduce our very own Brian Polinsky, who's going to teach us how to run a board meeting properly.
Thanks, Peggy. Good morning, everyone. So the topic of today is, of course, Robert's Rules of Order. The Robert's Rules of Order is quite a long book, and it's not really necessary to know everything that's in it. I'm going to be talking about primarily how you make motions and subsidiary motions and things like that. So that's going to be the main topic. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'll share with you, and that I also sent to Peggy. So she should also be able to get it out to you after the conclusion of today's webinar. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. So the first question, we're talking about Robert's Rules of Order. What actually is Robert's Rules of Order? Well, it's actually a manual of parliamentary procedure. It was created by a US Army officer back in the 19th century. And his name was Henry Martin Robert. And below I have a quote from him. It says, "The object of the Rules of Order is to assist an assembly to accomplish the work for which it was designed. Where there is no law, there is the least of real liberty." So this was his goal in publishing the Rules of Order, to make sure that anytime there's a meeting or assembly, that things are being conducted in a way that actually accomplishes the goals of that assembly. The term Robert's Rules of Order is also used more generically to refer to any of the more recent editions of this book. And there have been many, many editions of it over the years by various editors and authors. They're all based on Robert's original editions, but changes have been made over time to, for example, deal with new technologies. And that's usually the changes that are made to the Rules of Order. Let me see. Oh, just chat over here. So the very first manual of Roberts was published in 1876, and he actually based it on the rules and practice of the United States Congress. But he said it could be adapted for the needs of any non-legislative societies. And today, Robert's Rules is the most widely used manual of parliamentary procedure in the United States. Now, sometimes Robert's Rules is seen as a hindrance to meetings because it makes them overly formal, but it actually helps meetings run more smoothly if you use them correctly. And if you do use them properly, it helps make meetings fair by allowing everyone's voice to be heard, and it makes meetings more efficient by setting a structure and time to the meetings. So in fact, the model local bylaws include Article 14, and I assume most of your associations have incorporated this. It says, "Robert's Rules of Order latest edition shall be recognized as the authority governing the meetings of the association, its board of directors and committees, in all instances wherein its provisions do not conflict with the California Nonprofit Corporations Code or these bylaws." So I assume most of you have in your bylaws that you should be conducting board and committee meetings in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order. So next, we kind of have what I see as the key concept behind Robert's Rules of Order, the rights of the individual versus the rights of the group. Now, when it comes to the rights of the individual, individuals have rights to attend, speak at, and be an active participant in meetings. When we're talking about a board of directors meeting, you have everyone who's on the board of directors. Sometimes you have a board of directors meeting that's open to the general membership, or at least a part of it is open to the general membership. And of course, when we're talking about committees, we're talking about the committee members, their rights to attend and speak at the meetings. Now, every member of a meeting has the equal right to speak during the meeting. However, you have to balance that right of every member to speak against the rights of the organization as a whole to be able to conduct their business. And that's the whole point of Robert's Rules of Order. It's to seek to maintain the balance of every individual person who makes up the body versus the interests of the group as a whole. Now, few people have read all of Robert's Rules of Order. I also haven't read the entire book. It's quite long, and it's really not necessary for the types of meetings that you are conducting as an association board of directors or committee to know every little detail of Robert's Rules of Order. But there are some key things that you do need to understand for everyday meetings. The best way to learn Robert's Rules of Order is to actually practice and conduct meetings in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order. So, you know, it's something that it's important your members are trained in, your people who serve on board of directors and committees. And just by having them use the Robert's Rules of Order in their own meetings, they'll get better at doing it over time. So next we have some of the basic concepts, besides the main key concept I said, the rights of the individual versus the rights of the group. So all members and their rights are equal. We talked about that. Every individual has rights in the group. Next, a quorum must be present to do business. We'll talk about what I mean by a quorum on a subsequent slide. It's basically a certain percentage of the entire membership has to be present in order for the business to be transacted to be valid. Generally, the majority rules. There are some times where it takes actually 2/3 rather than a simple majority to do something. But most of the time, a simple majority of those present can take action. Silence is consent. So if you hold your tongue and don't do anything, then you are essentially consenting to what occurs during the meetings. Motions must receive full debate. That is very important, that anytime a motion is put forward, that everyone gets to say their piece. Once a decision is made, an identical motion must not be brought forward at the same meeting. So in other words, it's been voted on, it's been decided, we're not going backwards. Personal remarks during a discussion are always out of order. So we always want to focus on the actual substance of the motion being discussed, and we don't want things like personal insults or things that are unrelated to the matter at hand to be discussed. And then finally, one speaker and one question at a time. So anytime something is being discussed or debated, we're only focusing on that one particular thing, and we don't want to mix in other things. And only one person should be speaking at a time, and no one else should be speaking over them. Otherwise, you have a chaotic meeting. So next, let's talk about the role of the chair. And the chair is the person that actually runs meetings, calls the votes, and ensures adherence to the agenda of the group that's meeting. At board of directors meetings, usually the president will serve as the chair. If the president is not present, then someone else can be designated to serve as the chair at the board meeting. At committee meetings, usually the committee chair is the one who's going to serve as the chair. As I said, that can be delegated to another member for the duration of a meeting if the president or the committee chair is absent. Being the chair can also be delegated to another member for just segments of the meeting. And when that happens, the chair must yield the chair. So the chair will say, I'm yielding my chair to someone else, and they take over as chair for a certain amount of time, maybe to discuss a particular item or a particular motion. So, you know, for those of you who attend, and this is my experience, professional standards committee meetings at the C.A.R. meetings. We usually have a committee chair, professional standards, that will lead off the meeting, but then they will usually yield to vice chairs to present on certain items and to call questions on those particular motions. So that's at the prerogative of the chair, and that's usually decided in advance. Okay, so next topic, quorum. So a quorum means you need at least this many people to conduct business at a particular meeting. And the idea of a quorum is that it ensures a sufficient amount of members are actually involved in the decision-making taking place at that meeting. So when we're talking about directors meetings, our model local bylaws have certain quorum requirements. And it's possible that your own bylaws have different quorum requirements, but you'll have to double check on that. I think most of you probably use the quorum requirements that are in the model. And that is 51% of the directors who are on the board of directors must be present for a board meeting in order to transact board business. And for a membership meeting, 1/3 of the members have to be present in order for there to be a membership meeting in which business can be transacted. This is why you always need to do roll call so that you can be sure that you have a quorum present before going forward with the rest of the meeting. Now, once the quorum is actually established, it is maintained for the duration of the meeting, even if people leave during the meeting. So if you have a quorum at the beginning of the meeting, it is still considered to be maintained, even if people have to leave due to an emergency or they have some conflict. And if that person leaving would have meant that it's less than a quorum, if it had started off with that many people, it doesn't matter because you decide on the quorum at the beginning of the meeting. So question here, if quorum is present and some, oh, well, yeah, I just answered that one. All right.
Brian, I had a question sent to me. Does the president count as part of the quorum?
Yes, the president is an officer. So they are a member of the board of directors. So this is generally the regular agenda that you'll have for a meeting. Doesn't have to include all of these things for every single meeting, but these are the usual meeting topics. So it always begins with a call to order and then the minutes of the previous meeting, which should be approved by the board. Now, committees usually don't take minutes, so you don't have to do that when we're talking about a committee meeting. Question, does the chair of the committee also count as a person for the quorum? Yes, absolutely. Remember, the chair is a member of the committee or, a member of the board of directors. So the chair counts as part of the quorum. So reports of the officers, including the report of the treasurer, if there are any reports that need to be made, that would be next on the agenda. Then if there are any committee reports that need to take place at the board of directors meeting, then you go on to unfinished business. This would be any business that began discussion at a previous meeting, but you weren't able to resolve at that meeting. You would start with that before moving on to new business, and new business is anything that hasn't been discussed at a previous meeting. And then finally, you'll end with announcements and adjournment of the meeting. So, this is just the general meeting agenda. You can actually write out bullet points for each item of unfinished or new business that you want to include at the meeting. Says here, our associations committees do take minutes. Is there anything else we need to know? No, then just follow what I'm saying for the regular agenda, which is approving the minutes of the previous meeting every time you have a committee meeting.
Brian, I have a couple of questions just that came to me. So if a committee doesn't usually take minutes, does that mean we don't have to do them?
Yeah, it's not required for a committee to take minutes.
Okay, perfect. And then a second question, we have been advised by legal counsel not to include new business on the agenda. That ensures everyone knows what business will be discussed prior to the meeting.
I'm sorry, to include new business or not include?
It says not. Valerie, can you unmute and ask that question?
Yes. Hello. We have been advised to not include new business on our agenda because to do so would prohibit attendees from knowing in advance what business was going to be discussed. So apparently, if somebody's noticed of a meeting, they are to be given all the business that's going to be handled at that meeting. And under new business, it creates a situation where somebody could just bring something up and the participants of the meeting were not aware that that was going to be an item.
So, but people have the right to bring new business up at a meeting. I'm not sure I really understand that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, if someone brings up new business at a meeting and you don't have the ability or information to make a decision yet, then someone can make a motion to postpone discussion to a later point. So I think maybe I understand the idea here, but I just wasn't familiar with that concept. But let's move forward to the next stage, which is the motion. So motions are primarily what we're going to be talking about during the rest of today's webinar. A motion is a call to action, can be a request to do something, can be a request to vote on something, can be a request to change something. Really, the universe of possible motions is quite large. So essentially, when you're making a motion, you're saying, I think we should consider doing this. So there are different types of motions that can be made. What I have are actually certain symbols that I think are going to be useful when we're talking about each type of motion. I'm going to be using these symbols throughout the remainder of the PowerPoint presentation. And so you'll see these throughout. You can always refer back to this slide when we're talking about what these symbols mean. So these symbols, I'll use them every time I'm talking about a particular type of motion. So the first one, where you see a half and half pie, that means it requires a simple majority vote to pass the motion. When you see one that's more black than white, that means it requires a 2/3 vote of those present to pass. Our next symbol, the peace sign, basically means it requires a second. The motion requires a second in order to be considered. The next symbol with someone speaking means that the item is debatable. Where we have a don't sign over it, that means it's not a debatable item. The next one means it's amendable, and then the final symbol means that the chair is the one who determines whether or not the motion is in order, and it's actually not voted on. It's decided on by the chair. So we'll be going over all the various different types of motions and showing you how they're actually, how these symbols apply to each of them. So first we have the main motion. This is when someone wants to present an idea at the meeting. So for the main motion, that's basically what you want to be done. It needs to be an actionable item that requires the group to make a decision on how to handle it. And a motion that affects the main motion is considered to be a secondary motion. So all of the other motions, or most of the other motions that we're going to be talking about, are actually secondary motions that affect the main motion. But the main motion is the one that actually gets things started. So passing a main motion requires a simple majority vote. The main motion needs to be seconded. That's what that next symbol means. The main motion is always debatable, and the main motion is always amendable. So why do we have a second? The second makes the motion important enough to actually merit discussion. So it eliminates unnecessary discussion on a point that only one person believes is worth discussing. If at least one other person believes that the motion is worth discussing, then they can put forth a second that requires action. A second doesn't mean that the person seconding actually agrees with the motion, but simply feels that it should at least be discussed. The second can be shouted by any director or committee member, and it doesn't require recognition by the chair. It's good to know, if you're keeping minutes, who actually made the second for the record. I don't believe that's required, but you can do that if you're keeping minutes. So at a board of directors meeting, there can also be motions that emerge from a committee recommendation. When that's happening, since a committee consists of more than one person, a second is already implied. So if a committee recommends adoption of a motion, then it's clear that a majority of that committee, in other words, multiple people, already believe that the motion should be discussed. So therefore, in that situation, a second is not required when presenting a committee motion at a board meeting. So here's just an example. The committee recommends adoption, and we do so move. So in that circumstance, you don't need someone else to shout out a second. So once the motion has been made and seconded, in most cases, it's time for discussion. It belongs to the group at that point. The motion is considered to be on the floor, and the individual no longer has ownership of the motion at that point. meaning they don't get to just voluntarily withdraw it, and they cannot voluntarily change the motion. So a lot of times you'll hear people say, I want to make a friendly amendment. You can't really do it that way. There's a process to go through if you want to make an amendment to the motion, which we'll talk about. Once the motion is on the floor, any further changes or withdrawal of the motion has to be done by consensus. And there are further secondary motions that can be made in that circumstance, which we'll talk about. A little discussion now of discussion etiquette. So any limits to the discussion, in other words, the time of the discussion, the number of times an individual can speak, the total duration, etc., should be defined in advance and agreed upon by the group. Motions to limit debate can be made in order, and I'll talk about that a little later, but that can often be construed as directed at specific members. So it's better most of the time not to have to make those types of motions to limit debate. It's good to have ground rules set up in advance. It's the duty of the chair to ensure that the discussion that takes place at the meeting is orderly and relevant. So this is kind of where the chair comes in and recognizes each individual who is going to be speaking. And the chair will also make sure that the discussion is directly related to the motion and its merits. And if people are going off topic or talking about personal issues, remember personal issues are not discussed, then the chair needs to interrupt sometimes and say, we need to make sure this discussion is on topic and that we're discussing the actual motion that is under consideration. There are certain motions that do not allow discussion. I'll be talking about those subsequently. Most often those are procedural motions, but anytime you have a main motion or even a proposed amendment, those are just motions that do require discussion. When you're having a discussion, it's usually a good idea to alternate people on the pro side and the con side. And that way you're getting people on both sides of the issue, and it helps to limit unnecessary discussion. Because if you have one person after another who's making the same point, there's really no reason for them to keep on talking, except that person wants to, be up there and hear themselves talk. The idea of discussion is to actually hear both sides of the argument. It's good for members to wait to speak a second time until all the other interested members speak first. So you want to make sure that each person in the body does get their say before the person comes and speaks a second time. The discussion should be directed towards the chair and not at other members. You don't want it to get personal, and that reduces the assumption that someone is making a direct attack against someone else. Once the chair has actually recognized that there's no further discussion that's going to be taking place, then they can call for the vote. A member can also make a motion to call the question, but that always needs to be in order and should only be called if the discussion has truly ended and no one has anything more to say on the matter. It's not meant as a way of trying to limit debate. So someone shouldn't say, I call the question even though several more people have things that they want to say. For most motions, a result of more than 50% ayes of those voting. So that's why that's what we're talking about for the quorum. The quorum will be, those present and those who are actually voting passes a motion. So what are the types of votes that you can take at a meeting? For most types of votes, a voice vote should be fine. That can be utilized for the vast majority of votes in order to speed along the meeting. And then the chair makes a decision on who is essentially the loudest. Now, sometimes you'll do a voice vote and it turns out people are rather equally divided or close to it. And if someone in the body believes that the chair made the wrong call, any member can call for a hand count. As you'll see here with the symbols, that is not something that is debatable, and the chair decides whether or not that is appropriate if someone asks for a hand count. A hand or a standing vote occurs when called for aye or nay. The person will raise their hand or stand, and that may be better for votes requiring 2/3 or when the body is more evenly divided on something. And then finally, you can have ballot voting. You don't really need to use it for very many meetings. It's mainly used for elections. It's time consuming. Don't need to do it for most types of votes. I see that there's a question.
I do. Can you clarify So our committees do committee minutes, and a lot of times they have motions and obviously discussion and around that, and approve a motion that needs to go to our board of directors to have further discussion to approve something they want to do, whatever,
Sure.
say an event that they want to do that we've never done before. And so that motion is in our board of directors minutes to review that this committee wants to do a Cinco de Mayo party or something.
Sure.
So are you saying at that point, because there's already been a motion from our committees, that there doesn't need to be, if our board, our board could just go into discussion and approve that without creating their own motion to, yes, we approve the committee's?
No, the board, someone still doesn't need to make a motion and say this comes from the committee. It doesn't need a second though, when it comes from the committee.
Okay, so it still needs a motion, no second, because it's already, okay.
Yeah, that's the only difference really.
Okay, thank you.
And then Brian, Kathleen had a question and asked if a cyber vote would be considered a ballot.
Probably. I'm not sure what we're talking about when we're talking about a cyber vote. So I would need a little more clarity on that.
That would be a vote where the members could not be physically present, but still would take a vote on a motion.
So is this one we're talking about a written vote by written consensus? That is something that is provided for in the bylaws, but it's not really something that's covered by Robert's Rules of Order because it's an action taken without a meeting.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that's what you're referring to. Yeah, and the bylaws do include action taken, an action can be taken by written consensus without a meeting.
All right, thank you very much.
Sure. What about a vote by Zoom? Well, when you're on Zoom, you can do a voice vote or do like a hand vote and use the Zoom hand tool, or I don't know what you call that button to raise your hand when you're voting. So it's essentially done the same way. So let's move on. So when someone has made a main motion, someone else on the body has the right to make a motion to amend that main motion. This is considered to be a secondary motion, and it's a motion to change the motion that is currently on the floor. Someone needs to mute. All right. Usually that involves changing the wording of the motion or the intent of the motion. So as you'll see here with the symbols, a secondary motion, in order to be passed, or motion to amend, I mean, needs a vote of a simple majority, needs to be seconded. It is debatable, and it can also be amended. So a motion to amend can itself be amended. Yes, that is true. I'll actually show you a chart which demonstrates this a little bit. So a motion to amend, as I said, needs a second, is debatable. At this point, debate is limited only to whether the proposed change should be made, not on the merit of the original motion itself. This is, I'd say, one of the big areas where deliberative bodies get tripped up, because you'll often have people speaking to the main motion when what you should be talking about when someone is making a motion to amend is the amendment. The amendment needs to be decided first before you can return to the main motion. So after discussion has occurred on the motion to amend, a vote is made only on if the change should be made to the main motion. This vote will have no effect on whether or not the main motion is accepted. In other words, you're voting, should we be making this change to the motion, not should we actually do this thing. Amendments may only be made to the second degree. In other words, you can propose a motion to amend, that's to the first degree, and then a motion to amend the amendment to the second degree. But you can't go further than that. You can't make a motion to amend the amendment to the amendment. However, these must be resolved prior to new motions coming to the floor. So if someone wants to amend the amendment, that's a motion to the second degree, and you have to debate and discuss that and vote on that. And then you go back to The first degree, the motion to amend, and then that gets voted on, and then we go back to the main motion. And again, I'll show this to you in a chart. It will make a little bit more sense. Once secondary motions to amend are made, discussion then returns to the main motion. And at that point, new secondary motions may be made. So here's the motions chart. And this kind of shows you everything that goes on in a meeting related to motions in just one chart. You see at the top, we have the main motion, and then that moves on to debate. On the left side, there are other secondary motions that can be made. We haven't discussed those yet, and we will discuss those on some of the subsequent slides that I'll be going over. But then on the right, we have the motions to amend. So the primary one is just the regular motion to amend. That can be subject to debate and then a vote. And after that vote, we return to the debate on the main motion. And you'll see here that during debate on the primary amendment, someone can make a secondary motion to amend. That is a motion to amend the amendment. And then when that happens, we have to have a debate on that secondary amendment, a vote on that. And then once we do that, we return to the primary amendment. And then the debate on that continues. We vote on that. We go back to the main motion. So I think this chart really shows you the proper order of how you handle these things. There's also, you'll see a division. We'll talk about what that means to divide the question. And then once the main motion has been debated and voted on, then we move on to the next main motion. So this is a chart that's really important to, refer to and go back to when you're thinking about Robert's Rules of Order. So now let's talk about some of the other secondary motions that can be brought up during a debate on a main motion. First one here is motion to commit or refer. And by refer, we mean refer to a committee of some sort. This type of motion is done by a simple majority vote. It must be seconded. It is debatable and also amendable. So much like a main motion, all of the same things apply. This is often used when it's clear a motion hasn't been fully thought out, and when more details need to be laid out in order for the group to be able to make an informed decision. The motion must include the committee to which the motion will be referred and the proposed timeline for investigation. So all of that should be included in the motion to commit or refer. The referred committee can be one that already exists. That's the preferred option. And it can also be referred to a special committee that's created just for this circumstance. But if that is the recommendation, then the motion needs to provide specifics of the committee and its purpose. So usually better to refer it to a committee that is already in existence. Otherwise, you may have to spend some time debating and determining the parameters of the special committee. So this would be done in just an example on the final bullet point. I move the motion be referred to X committee and the committee report back at the next board meeting.
Brian, we have a question from Valerie.
Sure.
They have incidents where the maker of the motion and second is requested to accept a friendly amendment, and then the group votes on the main motion with the friendly amendment. Is that correct?
That is not in order. That is no. That is not within Robert's Rules of Order. If someone wants to make an amendment to the motion, they have to make a motion to amend. And then the motion to amend needs to be debated before returning to the main motion. So if you're following Robert's Rules of Order, there is no such thing as a friendly amendment. Not to say that you shouldn't make amendments, just that particular way of doing it is not the proper order. So the next secondary motion is postponement. That can be used for multiple reasons. And the same symbols apply here. It can be done by a simple majority vote, has to be seconded, is debatable, and also amendable. So what are the reasons that you might make a motion to postpone? So first, you're running out of time and another more important item needs to be addressed. You want to think about the matter a little more before having the body decide on the issue, or you just don't want to deal with it right now for some reason. That shouldn't be used to avoid a vote or a topic entirely. So you don't want to have a motion to postpone indefinitely. So if you are going to postpone it, it's a good idea to say when you will actually consider the issue. Motions to postpone are usually not the best idea. It's better to actually have some sort of action that will take place, like referring the matter to the committee or simply voting the matter down. But there may be certain circumstances where people just need a little more time to think and reflect. And a motion to postpone is an option there. The motion should include, as I said, when the topic will actually be discussed. So example would be motion to postpone this motion until the next board meeting. So then you actually have a concrete time when the motion will be discussed, the next board meeting. So next secondary motion we have is division of a question. And this allows for a longer or more complicated motion to be split into 2 or more parts. A motion asking for division is also done by a simple majority vote, does have to be seconded. But one difference here is it is actually not subject to debate, except that it is amendable. So that is the only thing that can be suggested in terms of the motion to divide the question. But debating the division is not something that should occur. For example, you agree that something should be done, but not for the reasons put forth in the motion. So let's say someone made a motion. I move that the board host a fundraising event on May 30th as a fundraiser for charity X. And maybe someone thinks, well, we do want to have a fundraising event on that day, but I'm not sure that we want it to go to charity X. Therefore, I'm going to make a motion to divide the question into 2 motions. The first motion would be, I move the board host a fundraising event on May 30th. Second motion, I move the fundraising event benefit charity X. And therefore, we have 2 different motions and we can debate each of those things individually. Once approved, the motions must then be handled as 2 separate main motions to be handled in sequence. Another secondary motion is one that limits debate. So a right to discussion is an inherent part of participation in a meeting. And that's why a motion to limit debate requires more than a simple majority. It actually requires a 2/3 vote in order to pass. It does need to be seconded. There's no actual discussion that occurs on the limit of debate, and it can be amended. So various limits can be set, but the main motion must be specific. In other words, it must limit the total number of times an individual speaks or for how long each person speaks. You can limit the total time for a discussion on a particular topic. And since specifics are outlined, it is in fact amendable, but not debatable. Another type of motion is a question of privilege. These are relatively minor. You can consider them just kind of complaints about things related to the meeting itself. These are things that are not debatable and are recognized and dealt with by the chair. Often these questions ask for things interfering with your ability to participate in the meeting. Most of the time it deals with the setting of the meeting room itself. So someone could say, point of privilege, can the chair have someone address the temperature in the room? It's too cold for me or too hot for me. Point of privilege is there's a water leak, can we change rooms? Things like that, just related to the meeting. Or if you're doing a meeting on Zoom, someone's having an issue with Zoom, they may raise a point of privilege and you can deal with that Zoom matter. But these are just issues related to the conduct of the meeting and not really to the motions themselves. Next type of motion is a motion to adjourn. That effectively ends the meeting. Can be done by a simple majority vote, has to be seconded, and it's not debatable. That can be used, but only used judiciously to force the end of the meeting. But that should only be if there are time constraints and the meeting actually needs to end. But it's most often used when the agenda is actually fully completed. If there are any items outstanding from the agenda when someone makes a motion to adjourn, then those items get put into unfinished business and get addressed at the next meeting. Another type of motion is a point of order, and that calls the attention of the chair to a potential breach of parliamentary procedure. So that is something that gets addressed by the chair and is not debatable. It can be used if the chair makes a decision that someone believes conflicts with Robert's Rules of Order. For example, they allowed a motion that was out of order, disregarded a motion that should have been considered, something like that. The chair then decides whether or not to accept the point of order. If someone disagrees after that chair's decision, then there is the ability to actually appeal the decision of the chair. And that actually gets debated on and voted on by a simple majority of those present. If someone makes a motion to appeal the chair's decision on a point of order, the chair then has to explain their ruling, and the group can then debate whether to sustain the chair's ruling and then the vote is whether to sustain or overrule the chair's decision. So the group as a whole does have the ability to overrule the chair on a point of order, but most of the time the chair should have some understanding of parliamentary procedure and should be able to accurately rule on a point of order on their own. Another type of point is a point of information. This is a request for information or clarification to help make a decision on another motion. Not debatable, and it's one that's recognized by the chair. So some examples are just asking how much was budgeted for a given event, asking what was done previously, asking who can attend a proposed event, really any piece of information that would be necessary to help the body make their decision. So the person asking for a point of information can rise from their seat or raise their hand, but should be acknowledged by the chair before making that point of information request. So another type of motion is a permission to withdraw. Remember I said that once a motion is seconded, it actually belongs to the group, but there is a way to withdraw it. The withdrawal simply doesn't happen automatically. Someone actually has to make a motion to withdraw the main motion. The vote on this request for withdrawal is a simple majority vote, and it's something that is actually not debated. So often when a main motion is being debated, that debate brings to light that it's really not a valid motion and there's a desire to retract it. But that can only be done by the person who supplied the original motion. So no one else can make a motion to request for withdrawal except for the person that made the original motion. The chair will then ask if anyone objects to withdrawal of the motion. If there are no objections, it is withdrawn. But if there is even a single objection, then there must be a vote to withdraw. And withdrawal will occur if you get a simple majority vote of those who are voting. And then we have motion to reconsider. This can be moved at any point. And when I'm saying motion to reconsider, that's reconsidering a motion that's already been considered and voted on previously. This is something that can be done by a simple majority vote. It does have to be seconded and debate will occur. It is not out of order to make a motion to reconsider, but the action is not taken until any pending motions are finished. This bolded point is very important as well. It can only be called in the same meeting or the meeting immediately after the original vote. Those are the only two times it is in order to make a motion to reconsider. And it can only be moved by someone on the prevailing side of the original vote. I call this the sore loser rule. That's my own name. I don't think that's the official name. If you lost on the original motion, you can't just keep bringing it up and saying, you know, I want you to reconsider this. I think you made a mistake. Someone who voted aye in a motion that was won approval or nay in a motion that failed to gain approval. That prevents a minority from constantly bringing up a dead point that's already been debated to death. So someone can say, I move to reconsider the vote on topic X. I actually voted in favor of the motion. Now I think we ought to reconsider it. If a motion to reconsider is approved, then the body addresses the previous question as a main motion. So the motion to reconsider isn't saying that we're going to overturn the previous motion immediately. It just means we're going to bring up a new debate on that main motion, and then we can vote on that main motion a second time. So that basically covers a Cliff's Notes version of Robert's Rules of Order. As a summary, they can be complex, but the basics are relatively easy to follow. Following Robert's Rules helps improve the participation of everyone in the meeting, and it makes meetings run more efficiently if it's used properly. Utilizing some of these charts that I provided to you within the meetings can help keep track of things so that people can, take a glance and say, doing this would be in order, doing this would be out of order. The chairs should always be familiar with the basics of Robert's Rules of Order, and practicing will make it go better. Question. Oh, we have a couple of questions. If a motion is withdrawn and modified, does it need to be in the minutes, or do we just put what the modification was in the minutes? Minutes should include the original motion, and then should say, this motion was withdrawn. It should include, if someone makes a motion to amend, that motion to amend should be included. Basically, anytime someone makes a main motion or a secondary motion, that motion ought to be included in the minutes. That's the idea behind keeping minutes. And I think the other question is very similar to that. All of these actions should be included in the minutes, not just the final motion. Any other questions for me? Do we need to include the names of the members making the motions? That's kind of a matter of local discretion as to how you keep minutes. But I certainly think that you can do so. There's no problem with including the names of people that make a motion and then people who second the motion. I got this on Zoom meeting a bit late, but will this recording be provided to us so that we can share with our board of directors? I believe these AM 101 sessions are recorded, Peggy, that's correct?
They are recorded, but they are not intended for Realtor members, because we've got a bunch of local staff who's being honest and open and asking questions and whatnot. So we don't want those open to the Realtors, but you certainly can do the PowerPoint.
Okay, seeing more in chat. Let's see. I'm seeing that many were instructed not to include the names in the minutes. That's totally fine. I assume that's for liability reasons. But yeah, there's nothing in Robert's rules that addresses that. We're talking about the conduct of the meeting itself rather than taking of minutes. All right.
Question, does the chair vote on motions?
That is something that every body can decide. I know that many associations have a general rule that their chair will only vote to break a tie. And so that is fine, but there's nothing in Robert's Rules of Order that says a chair is not allowed to vote. How do you deal with a member who says they want to be on the record as opposing a motion that has passed? There's nothing in Robert's Rules of Order that has a motion saying I want to be on the record as opposing. So that would be out of order. All right, any other questions? Can a chair request the motion, or does someone else have to request the motion? There's nothing that says a chair can't be the one to make the motion. But again, I know that some bodies prefer to have their chair not make motions and have someone else do it. But again, there's nothing in Robert's rules that says that has to be the case. All right, I'm not seeing anything else. Anything you want to end with, Peggy?
I don't have anything else, and you've answered all the questions. There's a lot of great feedback, by the way, in the comments. If nobody else has any questions, we can end here. Doesn't look like it. So everyone, thanks for attending. As soon as the video is uploaded to YouTube, I will send out a follow-up email to everybody that registered, and it will include the link to the YouTube as well as Brian's slides. Just a reminder that we're going to take about a month off, just kind of as a summer break, so there won't be any AM 101s following, too closely to this one. But as soon as they start rolling again, we'll keep you posted. Thanks, everybody. And Brian, thank you so much. This was really interesting.